Katrina tonight is now a Category 2 hurricane.
I really didn't think it was any more than a typical hurricane.
We've always talked about that nightmare scenario, what could happen if this hits New Orleans.
We evacuated, everybody that we needed to take with us and went to Houston.
Now I want to take you to I-10, and you can see the gridlock right there as people
I
make
remember
their way.
hearing a news report on the radio as we were stuck in, gridlock traffic, and they were calling for volunteers who had experience dealing with cadavers. And I just remember thinking, oh, wow, this is different.
Katrina, one of the deadliest hurricanes in U.S. history, taking more than 1,800 lives and devastating huge swaths of the Gulf Coast, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, all in Katrina's crosshairs. But long before this monstrous storm makes landfall on the Mississippi-Louisiana border, her swirling winds and powerful punch take aim at people and assets in the Gulf of Mexico. Deepwater oil platforms, hundreds of miles offshore.
Let me take you back about a week before Katrina, because that's when our planning for the hurricane really began.
At the time, Frank Glaviano is Shell's vice president of production for the Americas. He gathers his team to begin the process of getting more than 1,500 employees and contractors to safety, executing the evacuation plan the company has been practicing for 10 years. Thursday, August 25, 2005, Katrina gathers strength and changes course.
This killer storm is strengthening rapidly in the Gulf of Mexico tonight.
Over the next 2 days, heightened alert all along the Gulf Coast as Katrina explodes into a Category 5 hurricane.
I received a call on Saturday from our incident commander stating that he had made the decision to move the team from One Shell Square in New Orleans out to Robert.
Tom Broom's team is at Shell Robert Training Center, more than 50 miles northwest of New Orleans. That's where those on the front lines of oil and gas operations receive their training. Meanwhile, Shell and fellow oil companies continue offshore evacuations in a race against time.
By 2 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, before Katrina, I had confirmation that all of our employees and contractors had been evacuated from the platforms. All of the wells were secured. It was in a safe manner, and now it's time to wait and see where does the storm strike exactly and what, if any, will be the damage.
Shell employee Leslie Bowie and her family are hunkered down in Houston. That's where Kathy and Mark McCrae and their children take refuge as well. And Fred Palmer takes a shorter evacuation route to neighboring Baton Rouge. At Robert, about 30 people, ages 2 to 92, are huddled together. Members of the incident command team and their families dig in for a long night.
On August 29th, we woke up in Baton Rouge, and for the most part, New Orleans had dodged another bullet.
Many believe that, and then reality begins to sink in.
And as we got to Canal Street, we started noticing water coming up.
Ken Jones, former WDSU TV reporter.
We didn't know where it was coming from.
It is coming from breached levees and floodwalls, some 50 catastrophic failures.
We saw children on the side of the road actually carrying a lot of their belongings in sheets, and they were banging on the truck, "Mr. Take me with you." And of course we couldn't because there were so many people.
80% of New Orleans is soon underwater.
At that point, it's a story of survival. The convention center, the Superdome, places along the I-10, you're stranded out here without water, without food, and at that point, it becomes a dire situation. People start dying.
In the wake of Katrina, Frank Glaviano's weekly newsletter to Shell employees is unlike any he's ever written.
I've experienced many hurricanes in my life and know how to deal with them, or so I thought. The death toll may never really be known, but most estimates put it in the thousands. Human suffering is everywhere.
Heartbreak and uncertainty are the themes in every Katrina story, and the search for a silver lining.
For me, all I can do is think about the positive aspects and to once again be reminded what my knees are for. We are Shell, one company, one family in crisis. We are people with great resolve and tremendous determination. We are people with beating hearts and have and will continue to reach out and help others. Well, it was such a unique time for all of us to experience this. To be in the middle of the disaster that you're having to deal with and fix is what made it so different.
And so very challenging, first on a human level, then taking care of business.
They sent out an email, and all that email said is, we want to know where you are. We want to know that you're safe. Dial into this number.
Sitting there taking the time to call in, yes, we're okay, and just being touched by this voice on the other end that just, how can we help you?
Despite the staggering death toll, Shell accounts for all its personnel and their families. One Shell Square weathers the storm relatively well, but downtown New Orleans is uninhabitable, and no one knows for how long. That reality transforms Robert Training Center into Camp Robert, temporary home to some 400 displaced Shell employees and their families.
We had Shell employees arrive without food, without water, without ice, without clean clothes.
Shell provides these necessities and more, purchasing homes and apartments for employees to rent and offering no-interest loans.
They took care of transportation. They took care of salaries. They took care of medical expenses.
And they offer a shoulder and an ear.
My most important role during those first few weeks when people were checking into Robert was to listen.
As the healing begins, so does the work of getting back to business. At the top of the list, making a critical decision about Shell's future.
Leave it all in New Orleans, split the baby, some stay in New Orleans, some come to Houston, or take it all to Houston.
We ultimately decided as a team that New Orleans was our partner, and you don't abandon a partner after 50 years.
The Coming Home campaign is born, as many around the nation wonder out loud why any person, much less a corporation, would want to stay in the storm-ravaged city.
Our corporate words were, we support the communities in which we live and work. And coming back to New Orleans was living those values.
We weren't bragging, we definitely were trying to help the city, use us as an example. Look, if Shell can come back, so can you. So I'd like to welcome everyone back and say to the city of New Orleans that Shell is home.
January 30th, 2006, a day etched in the memories of those who were there.
It was a party. In New Orleans, you have a party. We had the flag that had been on one shell, and it actually was up during the storm, so it was tattered, and we retrieved it, and we brought it up to Robert. And it flew at Robert the whole time we were there. And so one of the visible signs of our returning was to raise the flag at one shell again. And Irvin Mayfield, who's a world-renowned jazz trumpeter, came, and he played the national anthem on his trumpet. Then we had a second line to the park.
The second line, the quintessential Louisiana tradition of following the band in joyous dance. After a second devastating hurricane just 3 weeks after Katrina and months of despair, finally a glimmer of hope and a reason to celebrate.
Celebration is a tradition in New Orleans. We celebrate things. And Mardi Gras is one of our biggest celebratory seasons. We love Mardi Gras.
Real Mardi Gras is on, St. Charles Avenue, and having families together, that coming back, that first Mardi Gras, and seeing people that you didn't know what happened to them, right? What really struck out for me is they would say, this is my friend Kathy, this is my friend Mark, they work for Shell. So that was the impact. What Shell did for the employees is truly amazing, but the impact that Shell had on the community of New Orleans just by its response, kind of blew me away.
Following the storm, with recovery limping along, the city's iconic jazz festival is beginning to look like another casualty. Quint Davis, producer of the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival, gets a call from then Lieutenant Governor Mitch Landrieu several weeks after Katrina.
He said to me, Quint, not having the Jazz Fest is not an option. Period.
Jazz Fest is 2 spring weekends of music, food, and a celebration of everything that makes New Orleans, New Orleans. With an annual economic impact of more than $300 million, the festival is not just a cherished tradition, it's a vital source of income.
When Shell came along to bring the festival back after Katrina, a lot of people look at that as bringing back the culture of New Orleans.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's on. First and foremost, we are honored and overjoyed to announce the arrival of the first ever Jazz Festival presenting sponsor, Shell.
Once Shell steps in as presenting sponsor, other sponsors come on board. Davis and his team scramble to line up talent and get the battered fairgrounds in reasonable shape, all the while wondering, if we build it, will they come?
The morning of the opening, we're in here getting ready, and we start to get calls from the police and the traffic people outside. So what is it? And they say, well, excuse me, there's thousands and thousands of people lining up outside of the fairgrounds in every direction, and they're stopping the traffic. And that moment, when we opened the gates and the people ran onto the field, that was one of the signature moments in bringing New Orleans back to life.
The return of Jazz Fest helps stabilize the hemorrhaging economy as Shell works to stabilize its operations in the city it chooses to still call home. Frank Glaviano on some of the business reasons for the company to keep its New Orleans roots.
But if you look at operating the Gulf of Mexico, New Orleans is more centrally located. It's closer to the terminals where we operate. We're closer to those government officials that regulate us, being right here in New Orleans. And so it made some operational sense.
After 50 years of doing business in New Orleans, there's an immense emotional connection for employees to stay in their shattered city. Shell goes deep into the community to assist in the recovery of its neighbors, while at the same time navigating its own daunting recovery effort and the ripple effect across its global business, the global financial markets, and the nation's fuel supply.
As we're tracking the storm, we knew that the eye of the storm was passing over the Mars platform and a floating drilling rig nearby.
Frank Glaviano recalls the harrowing hours during the height of Katrina's Category 5 strength. The team doesn't know that the eye of the hurricane is battering Mars with 80-foot waves and 200-mile-per-hour winds. Once the storm passes, the first report comes in.
I remember the phone call, and she said, we've lost the rig at Mars.
At the time, Mars is the largest producing platform in the Gulf of Mexico. The first flyover after the storm reveals unimaginable devastation. Lori Freeman is on that flight.
As we were flying up to the Mars platform, I could tell from the silhouette that something was wrong.
In her 4 years of working on the Mars tension leg platform, she never expected this.
I was absolutely horrified when I saw the silhouette of the platform without a very large derrick coming up. It was almost unfathomable to think about very large 4-foot beams actually bending over like plastic. It's just horrific. I could not believe what we were looking at.
My first thought was, can you even fix this? And this was our largest asset in the Gulf of Mexico and one of the largest for Shell in the world.
Our production at that time was about 140,000 barrels of oil a day and about 165 million cubic feet of gas a day. And that was about 25% of Shell's Gulf of Mexico production.
As Mars operations manager, Floyd Landry quickly understands the enormity of the challenge from both a corporate and a national perspective.
It was a big deal to Shell, and not only the nation, because of the refining capabilities. You know, you had to feed the refineries, and if you withdrew that amount of production, then obviously it would have a national impact.
It doesn't take long for the White House to call.
Daily.
Charlie Williams, former vice president of Shell's Gulf of Mexico hurricane recovery.
The government was interested then. It was the Minerals Management Service that was really the regulator, along with the Coast Guard. And of course, the Coast Guard was calling all the time because they were really worried about spills.
For 3 months, the recovery team hunkers down to design a course of action, starting with the toppled drilling rig.
That drilling rig was on top of a lot of our process equipment. It weighed the equivalent of 2 Boeing 747 jumbo jets. So as part of that process, we needed to remove all of the debris we could with cranes. And when we were doing that, we would keep water going on the structure just in case we had a fire.
Another problem to solve early on, where to house some 500 offshore workers.
We had a floating hotel that came from Norway, and we moved it over here, which had actually never been done before in deep water.
Over the next several months, the deep water firsts continue, setting new standards for the industry.
Nobody had ever repaired pipelines in 3,000 feet of water, but we'd actually repaired pipelines at Auger and at Mars and at Ursa. So we went down and cut these pipelines and built repair sections and installed repair sections and did that all with ROVs. That had never, ever been done before.
9 painstaking months later, Mars is back on production, 3 months ahead of schedule, making a direct impact on global crude prices and world financial markets.
Crude oil climbed to $68.74 a barrel. That puts it within striking distance of an all-time high. Now, chief among
By the following July, Mars is already producing slightly above its pre-Katrina rates. The National Ocean Industries Association presents Shell with the 2006 Safety and Seas Award for its recovery of Mars. The company goes on to set a Gulf of Mexico production record within 5 years of unprecedented storm damage that derailed its operations.
So the story of Mars and the Mars field since Hurricane Katrina, to me, is a story of resiliency and the ingenuity of all the people who work within Shell's deepwater business.
In 2008, Derek Newberry is at the forefront of Shell's deepwater expansion with the Mars B development. February 2014, it comes onto production as Shell's largest tension leg platform in the Gulf of Mexico, extending the life of the Mars field to the year 2050.
When we think about the hydrocarbon resource base within the Mars field, it truly is a world-class oil development and oil deposit. And it plays an important role to the Gulf of Mexico's contribution to the U.S. energy supply.
The success of the Mars field and other tension leg platforms dates back to 1994 and a revolutionary breakthrough.
You know, there really was no deep water until Shell built Auger, the first TLP, and put it on production. And because up until that time, you know, people actually still didn't believe that there was going to be world-class production and world-class reserves in deep water.
In July of 2014, Shell retrofits Auger, its oldest platform in the prolific Gulf of Mexico, allowing it to access a new subsea field in deep water. Today, Gulf of Mexico deepwater production provides 17% of the United States crude oil supply and 5% of its natural gas supply. It is a major contributor to something Americans never thought possible: energy security. And the valuable lessons learned from one of the deadliest hurricanes in U.S. history continue to have a significant impact on the oil and gas industry across the globe.
Nobody had predicted this strength of storms, and certainly not 2 storms in the same year. And it especially changed the design criteria for anchoring mobile drilling rigs because we had so many of them adrift. We've had hurricanes since then, and there's been no rigs adrift since then.
Katrina. In the 10 years since the storm slammed upon the shores of Gulf Coast, Louisiana, those who survived her wrath have moved on. But their personal stories of loss and life are still fresh.
Throughout this whole recovery, the people at Shell, a lot of people were in the exact same position as I was. They lost everything, yet they were also finding ways to participate, return to work, and help reconstruct and get things back to normal.
The new normal, life after Katrina. From Bourbon Street and beignets to Mardi Gras and Jazz Fest, the heart of this city still beating loud and strong.
You know, in New Orleans, we don't only live here, we live here.
A resilient community celebrating survival and their culture.
If we just know that we all can rally together and do amazing things, I mean, to me, that's what Katrina and Shell and living in New Orleans really brought it all together.
Renewing their spirit, reclaiming their lives, rebuilding their city after the storm.